What's going on, everybody? It's Chris solo today. Jay's taking a vacation, and we had some hot news drop on Warhammer community, and I wanted to get out ahead of it. The Warhammer Almanac is basically releasing every Monday, and they had one of the biggest ones today revealed, which is how the combat phase is going to work. Now, this is a pretty huge part of the game. Jay and I like kind of argue that like movement is probably number one, like how the models move around in a classic sort of like shapes game where you have squares and you're trying to line up the right spots. Like obviously movement's going to determine a lot of the battle because you're trying to get in people's flanks, you're trying to get the charges off. That sort of stuff's going to determine probably the majority of games. But how the combats actually fight and work out is probably just as important, if not maybe second most important. And I have to be honest, I was kind of surprised reading the article. There are a ton of changes for those of you that have played previous editions of Warhammer. There's quite a lot of stuff. So basically, the phase is going to break down, like they said, into four things. That seems to be the case with all the phases. There's choose and fight, which is basically you're going to like pick your combat in order. They didn't mention if it's back and forth like sort of some of the more modern war games. I have a feeling it's not the case. It's going to be the person whose turn it is going to pick a unit, just kind of choose which way they resolve in which order, and then they're going to fight them. The second step is you calculate your combat resolution, which is like a classic Warhammer thing. You get to do some math, and then you make your break test if someone won. The person who lost makes their test, and then there's a pursuit. So there's going to be some options there, so we'll kind of discuss that. So it sounds like, so they haven't given obviously all the details, but the way a combat's going to work is all of the models in the front rank are going to fight. Even if I have more models than you, and I kind of have like, four models that aren't in base contact in that front rank, they've kind of had this cool rule, which is really neat, and I think which is basically like the bigger unit kind of envelops the smaller unit, so those models on the outskirts will still fight. I think they basically alluded to the fact that models that aren't in base contact will only be able to contribute with one attack. So multi-attack, like maybe Chaos Warriors or something like that, they're on the skirts of the unit. Maybe they're only chipping in with one attack. And they did allude to the fact that there are going to be ways for multiple ranks to fight. So I imagine the classic things like spears or unit special rules will allow for maybe extra ranks of fights, but they did say that it will be limited to one attack for those units. So this does have the potential to be less bloody than previous editions of Warhammer, but it seems like you're still going to be able to get a fair number of attacks, and it's going to definitely promote you wanting to go wide with your units. So big, chunky, sort of like Horde-esque units from 8th edition will still probably see play because you're going to want to go pretty wide so you get lots of attacks with your kind of more combat-oriented units. Of course, though, that does put you vulnerable to being flanked, and it makes you a little less maneuverable, so that's kind of the trade-off there, right? Yeah, and so the next part is basically like who attacks first. So initiative is how it's going to be determined, which is really cool to see. That is also like kind of like a classic Warhammer-esque thing. So models with the highest initiative, not just initiative stats. So this is another interesting change, and I'm not sure this has ever been the case in Warhammer, but you're basically going to take your natural initiative, and then you're going to apply any bonuses that you get. So like charging units, for example, or if you're fighting in the flank or the rear, you're going to get bonuses to your initiative. So the cool thing is you could have like an elf swordmaster unit they use in the example, or like a prince or like some crazy character, and they might be charged and fighting in the rear, but they're still striking first because they're just so quick. I think that's really cool. But it's also neat that I like the fact that charges matter. For that initiative, you get to jump on your opponent with like lances or something like that. It should matter against sort of like similar speed units. So it's kind of like a really neat way to accomplish that. I like that using the initiative stat and adding bonuses, negatives. You might even see some weapons sort of give like initiative bonuses, and then it gives a lot of breadth to the game. Like you can make sort of like more variation in units and kind of more unique things, I think. The next sort of like reveal, which is pretty much the same, but there's a key difference there. They revealed that the weapon skill, the classic Warhammer weapon skill chart is back. Basically, if we're the same weapon skill, we're hitting on 4s. If I'm 1 better than you, or up all the way up to 6 better. So if I'm hitting on 3s. If I'm 6 better than you, this is where it gets new. you actually hit on twos, which is really cool because I can't tell you how many times I used to roll up with a crazy weapon skill 9 character against like some human or whatever, and you get the classic I roll 3 or 4 attacks and it's just ones and twos and you miss a whole bunch and you're like, this would never happen. He'd be cleaving and whatever. So it's cool. Your favorite little your high weapon skill character will be mangling low level troops as he should be, hitting on twos, which is really cool. I do like though that you never hit worse than a 5, so I really like that because I feel like hitting on 6s can be quite punishing with melee attacks, and it's kind of a bummer when you're like in a situation where like you're like you can't hit or wound something, and I never really like that in war games. Even if you have to suspend a little bit of reality, I think it's a good thing. So that's how you do your attacks, and then they kind of said basically wounding and armor saves is kind of going to be the same, which is your classic sort of stuff that they talked about in the shooting phase. The next thing, so break tests. This is where stuff gets even more different and a lot more interesting. I think there's like a 3-tiered thing to break tests. So you're gonna essentially roll if you lose combat. So like you're adding up your combat resolution, and they basically talk about how it's your classic like for every wound you cause, unsaved wound you cause, you get 1 point. There's banner, ranks, battle standard. I think there's a couple other little small ones. You can check the article out. But nothing surprising there. It was all kind of stuff that we've kind of been familiar with in old editions of Warhammer. And if you happen to lose that combat, you will be taking a break test. Now, your break test is modified by how much you lose by. So if you lost combat by 3 after adding up all that math, you will be basically rolling the dice and subtracting 3 from the result. So, but this is where it gets really interesting. So if I have a leadership of 7 or 8 and I lost by 3, for example, if I roll under 8, let's say I roll a 3 on 2 dice, which is like a great roll. I basically pass, and they call it essentially like I give ground. So I lost the fight, but my guys are like, they're not really like too upset about it. They just kind of push. It sounds like they push back a little bit. I don't know if anyone played War of the Ring. That's how it kind of worked, and I really like that. You basically move. They didn't say how far, but it's like an inch or two. You get kind of pushed back by losing the combat, but you're still basically ready to fight. There's no loss in morale or anything like that. Now, if you, in this situation where I lost by 3 and my leadership's 8, if I had rolled a 6, so I technically failed, but I still rolled under my natural, what they're calling my natural leadership, I will essentially, what they call fall back, but in good order. So I'm kind of moving, it sounds like, to the same spot. I'm not running away, but my guys are a little bit more sort of like beaten up, and this will matter more when the opponent's choosing his resolution. So, and the third and final one is like the old classic, like, so in this situation, like my leadership's 8, I roll over an 8, so I roll a 9. So I rolled over I lost combat by 3. I rolled over my natural leadership. My guys are just, see you later, break and flee. So that's the classic one everyone will remember. So this is kind of cool. There's a little bit more nuance to failing and losing combats, which I really like, because it was always very like black and white before, and I think people didn't love that. Like the idea that like high disciplined troops would always just like, if they lost combat, they'd break and flee a very certain way. This is cool because it adds more granularity, and like higher leaderships are going to matter a lot more because you're not going to be breaking the bad way as often in this game, which is kind of cool. So you're going to see less break and flees and charge and cut downs, I think, which I think is generally a good thing because it means you're going to have to like fight actually. So what does the pursuer do in this situation? So they have 3 choices. If they want to stay still, which I think is cool, is a really cool tactical option, you actually have to pass the leadership test because your guys just beat up the opponent. They want to get in there and finish the job. So you have to pass the leadership test if you want to stay still. And that's cool because that might give you more tactical options if you have the next turn or something like that. The next one is follow-up, where you basically move in to fight. And if your opponent only gave ground, which means they basically lost but passed their modified leadership test, but they lost, you're just going to keep fighting, basically, which is, yeah. Now, if they lost and they passed sorry, yeah, if they lost and they passed, if they lost the test but they passed their normal leadership test, if they, geez, I'm getting conflated here. If they lost, this is, it might get like a little complicated. If they lost the fight, they failed their modified leadership test, but they passed their natural leadership test, and you pursue them, you will count as charging again. That's tough to get right in the head. So there are these nuanced situations. So you do get rewarded for beating them essentially in combat. Even though they stuck around, technically, you will get to basically charge them again when you get a chance, which is kind of cool. So as you can see, the combat phase, I think so far has probably the most differences out of any previous edition of Warhammer that I remember playing, which is going to add a lot of nuance to the game. Initiative matters a lot, it seems like. Getting the charge matters. And it seems like high leadership is going to be really important. So having characters and units that keep that leadership high is going to play a huge part. What do you guys think about the combat phase? Are you excited to hear that? Obviously, there are the Tomb King reveals. Maybe I'll talk about that later this week. Are you still stoked about the old world? Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll take care later, guys. Bye-bye.